Single mother called the officer bad and delicious, and he heard everything. What happened next changed their lives forever. A story of passion that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and comment where you are watching from. The sweltering heat of February transformed the streets of East Los Angeles into a true open-air sauna. The simple brick houses, painted in faded tones by the relentless sun of the outskirts, seemed to exhale the steam rising from the cracked asphalt. Sarah Johnson adjusted the noisy ceiling fan in the small room she shared with her 8-year-old daughter Emily and walked over to the living room window. The thin fabric of the floral curtain clung to her sweaty skin as she observed the morning hustle of the neighborhood. "Oh, Carla, you have no idea what happened here last week," Sarah whispered into the phone, holding the old device between her shoulder and ear while folding her daughter's clothes. Her brown hair, tied back in a messy ponytail after a night shift at the hospital, framed a tired but still youthful face at 35. "An officer came here because of that scandal with Mark Drunkett. The door, remember?" Her friend on the other end laughed. "Tell me everything, Sarah. What was he like?" Sarah bit her lower lip, a nervous habit she had developed since her tumultuous divorce 2 years ago. "Carla, that man is, how can I explain, dangerously attractive. A bad boy, you know, the kind you know will cause trouble but can't get out of your head." Her words flowed softly, laden with a mix of repressed desire and deep-seated distrust. Sarah had learned the hard way that handsome and charming men could hide cruel natures. Mark, her ex-husband, was living proof of that. But something about that officer was different. Perhaps it was the patience with which he had listened to her account of her ex's aggressive behavior, or the gentleness with which he had addressed little Emily, who was hiding behind her mother's legs. "He has these green eyes that seem to read your soul, a deep voice that resonates in your chest when he speaks, and those arms." Sarah paused, feeling her heart race at the mere thought. Jesus, how embarrassing to talk like this, but it's been so long since a man looked at me like I was more than just a broken single mother. The sound of firm footsteps on the asphalt interrupted her thoughts. Sarah stretched her neck, trying to see who was walking down the street at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. Most neighbors had already left for work, and the kids were at school. Her heart leapt when she recognized the tall, imposing silhouette approaching her house. It was him, the very officer she had just confessed her forbidden fantasies about. Officer David Anderson, 40 years old, 6 feet tall, walked with the upright posture that betrayed years of military discipline. The navy blue uniform was immaculate, even under the scorching heat, and his black hair, closely cropped on the sides, glistened slightly with sweat. He occasionally stopped to check the house numbers, consulting a small notebook he carried in his shirt pocket. "Carla, I need to hang up. I'll call you back," Sarah murmured hurriedly, disconnecting the call before waiting for a response. David stopped right in front of the low gate of her house, checking the address once more. It was a routine follow-up visit, a mandatory protocol after reports of domestic violence to ensure there was no recurrence of the aggressor. But if he were completely honest with himself, he admitted he felt a genuine curiosity about how that brave woman who had faced her drunk ex-husband the previous week was doing. His green eyes met Sarah's through the foggy glass of the window, and time seemed to suspend for an eternal moment. Her face, which seconds before had expressed sensual admiration over the phone, was now flushed with an intense shade of absolute embarrassment. Sarah swallowed hard, feeling as if the ground could open up and swallow her. "Oh my God, did he hear?" She thought, her heart pounding so loudly she feared he could hear it through the wall. David, noticing the evident embarrassment of the woman, offered a half-smile. Not mocking, but with an almost tender understanding. He had learned to read people over 20 years of service, and he could see that Sarah was not the type to make light comments about others. There was something vulnerable and authentic about her that intrigued him from their first encounter. He walked up to the peeling green iron gate and knocked 3 times respectfully. The sound echoed through the small backyard where a century-old mango tree provided the only generous shade on the property. Sarah took a deep breath, quickly smoothing her simple t-shirt and walking to the door. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the key in the lock. When she opened the door, she tried to assume a professional demeanor, as if it were possible to erase the last 5 minutes of her existence. "Good morning, Mrs. Johnson," David greeted, lightly touching the brim of his cap. His voice was exactly as she had described to her friend, deep, engaging, with a soft southern accent that revealed his origins. "I'm Officer Anderson. I came to conduct the protocol follow-up regarding last week's incident. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Sarah tried to find her voice, but the words seemed to have completely escaped her. She nodded positively, opening the door wider and gesturing for him to enter. His masculine scent, a subtle mix of soap and some woody essence, flooded her senses as he passed by her. The small living room of the house, decorated with simple but well-kept furniture, bore witness to the meeting between 2 people who, unknowingly, were about to have their lives completely transformed by a combination of chance, courage, and the human capacity to find hope even in the most unlikely moments. Sarah's modest living room felt even smaller with Officer David's imposing presence. He discreetly observed the surroundings: the floral-covered 2-seater sofa, the makeshift bookshelf made of bricks and planks filled with nursing books and a few novels, the pictures of little Emily scattered across the wall in simple frames. There was an evident care in every detail, an attempt to create beauty and coziness, even with limited resources. "Please, have a seat," Sarah managed to murmur, pointing to the sofa while she settled into the wooden chair at the dining table. The safe distance between them helped control the nerves, but it didn't stop her from noticing how the uniform accentuated his broad shoulders, or how his large, careful hands held the notebook. David sensed her tension and decided to break the ice professionally. "How have you been feeling since our conversation last week? Has there been any more incidents with your ex-husband?" Sarah shook her head, her loose hair now framing her face in a way that made her look younger. "No, officer. Mark hasn't shown up around here anymore. I think he got scared when he found out the police had been called." She paused, intertwining her fingers nervously. "In fact, ever since Mrs. Johnson from the corner spread the word that there was a squad car on the street, he hasn't come near the neighborhood." "That's the intention," David replied, making some notes. "People like your ex-husband tend to back off when they realize there are real consequences for their actions." He raised his green eyes to her, and Sarah felt that familiar tightness in her stomach again. "But I need to ask you about your daughter. How is she coping with all this?" Sarah's face softened immediately when the subject turned to Emily. "Emily is a strong girl, very smart for her age. She understands more than I wish she did, you know." Sarah stood up and walked to the shelf, grabbing a recent school photo of her daughter, a little girl with curly hair and a toothy grin, wearing the navy blue uniform of the local school. "She asks when her dad is going to stop being sick," Sarah continued, using air quotes with her fingers. "That's how I explain his drinking to her, that it's an illness that makes people confused and aggressive." David looked at the photo Sarah showed him, noticing how her face lit up when she talked about her daughter. There was a fierce maternal strength there, a determination he recognized in many women he had encountered throughout his career, women who became true lions when it came to protecting their cubs. "That's a good way to explain it," he commented, carefully handing the photo back. "Children need to understand that adult behavior isn't their fault, but they also deserve honesty appropriate for their age." "Do you have children?" Sarah asked impulsively, immediately regretting the indiscretion. "I'm sorry, it's none of my business." "No problem," David smiled for the first time since he arrived, and Sarah felt as if the sun had entered through the window. "I don't have children. My career has always been very demanding, and relationships just didn't work out." There was a hint of melancholy in his voice that Sarah picked up immediately. "I can imagine," she murmured, sitting back down. "It must be hard to balance such a dangerous profession with personal life." David nodded, closing the notebook and leaning slightly forward. "Actually, Miss Johnson, there's something I need to tell you. I was recently transferred to this area." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "My previous precinct in South Los Angeles had some internal issues. I decided it was time for a fresh start." Sarah furrowed her brow, her natural distrust of authorities immediately activated. Mark had always spoken poorly of the police, calling them corrupt, and although she knew that much of what her ex-husband said came from resentment over his own DUI arrests, a part of her remained wary. "What kind of issues?" she asked directly, crossing her arms. The question caught David off guard. He was used to people avoiding direct questions to police officers, either out of fear or respectful distance. Sarah's frankness was refreshing, even if a bit intimidating. "There were allegations," he replied honestly. "Unfounded allegations about irregular procedures. Nothing was proven because there was nothing to prove, but the environment became uncomfortable." His eyes met hers firmly. "I chose to request a transfer to start fresh, where I could prove my worth again." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of dishonesty. She had learned to detect lies during her years with Mark, who lied as naturally as he breathed. But in David's green eyes, she saw no evasion or discomfort, only raw honesty and perhaps a bit of pain. "That must have been difficult," she said softly, her defensive posture relaxing slightly. "It was," David admitted. "But sometimes life forces us into changes that end up being for the better." He paused significantly. "Meeting people like you and your daughter reminds me why I chose this profession." A comfortable silence settled between them, laden with a mutual understanding neither had expected. Sarah realized she was looking at him in a way that had nothing to do with police procedures, and David noticed how her defensiveness had given way to something closer to genuine curiosity. The moment was interrupted by the sound of keys in the lock. Emily was arriving home from school, as she always did at 11:30 on Tuesdays when she only had a half day. "Mom, I'm home! Mrs. Johnson said there's a man here again," the girl shouted from the backyard, her childlike voice filled with protective concern. Sarah quickly stood up, walking to the door to intercept her daughter before she entered in a panic. David remained seated, understanding that sudden movements could startle a child who had clearly developed hypervigilance due to family conflicts. "Emily, come here, sweetheart. Do you remember the officer who came here last week? He came back just to check if we are okay." The girl appeared in the doorway, her school uniform slightly wrinkled, backpack on her back, and her large, expressive eyes examining David with a mix of curiosity and caution. She had inherited her mother's curly hair and dark eyes, but there was something in the way she lifted her chin that reminded him of Sarah's determination. "Hi, Emily," David said gently, remaining seated so as not to appear intimidating. "How was school today?" The girl looked at her mother, seeking approval, before answering. "It was fun. We learned about the planets." She hesitated for a moment. "Did you come to arrest my dad?" The direct and innocent question created a palpable moment of tension in the small room, highlighting how this child had been prematurely exposed to adult conflicts that no 8-year-old should witness. Emily's question hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. David felt the weight of responsibility in his words. An 8-year-old shouldn't have to ask questions about arrests concerning her own father. He looked at Sarah, who had visibly paled, and then turned his attention back to the girl with a gentleness that surprised her mother. "No, Emily, I didn't come to arrest anyone today," David replied calmly, his large hands resting on his knees. "I came here to make sure you and your mother are safe and happy. It's part of my job to take care of the families in the neighborhood." The girl dropped her backpack on the floor and took a few steps closer, her childlike curiosity overcoming her initial caution. "My mom said that police only arrest bad people. Is my dad a bad person?" Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling as if she were walking through an emotional minefield. Mark was many things: an alcoholic, irresponsible, sometimes aggressive. But he was still Emily's father, and she was determined not to completely demonize him in her daughter's eyes. "Your dad is not a bad person, Issa," David replied, before Sarah needed to find words. "But sometimes adults make bad choices, like drinking too much, and that can hurt the people they love. When that happens, we police try to help the whole family, including the person making those bad choices." Emily processed this information with the seriousness of a child who had grown up too fast. "How do you help?" "Well, we talk to everyone to understand what's happening. Sometimes we suggest that the person seek medical help to stop drinking, and always we make sure that kids like you are protected and loved." Sarah watched the interaction with growing admiration. David spoke to Emily without condescension, but with a simplicity appropriate for her age. There was no rush in his answers, nor discomfort with the difficult questions the girl asked. "Do you know my dad?" Emily asked, sitting on the floor near David's feet, a sign of trust that did not go unnoticed by Sarah. "I met him once when he was very confused because of the drinking," David explained honestly. "At that moment, he couldn't think clearly about how his actions affected you and your mom." "He gets really angry when he drinks," Emily confessed quietly, fiddling with the laces of her sneakers. "But he wasn't always like this. He used to take me out for ice cream and taught me how to ride a bike." Sarah's heart ached, hearing the nostalgia in her daughter's voice. David felt a pang of something he couldn't quite identify. Perhaps it was indignation that a child had to deal with the deterioration of a parental relationship, or maybe it was something more personal related to his own troubled childhood. "You know, Emily, one thing I've learned in my job is that when adults are sick because of drinking, the good memories you have of them are still true," David said gently. "The illness doesn't erase the dad who took you for ice cream. It just makes it very hard for him to be that dad right now." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. In all the months dealing with therapists, social workers, and even other police officers, no one had explained the situation to Emily with such clarity and compassion. "Mum, can I ask the officer a question?" Emily asked, turning to her mother with that formality that children sometimes adopt when they feel they are treading on serious territory. "Of course, sweetheart," Sarah replied, curious about what would come next. Emily turned back to David with a determined expression. "If my dad gets better from his sickness, will you let him come here again?" The question revealed a childlike hope that broke the hearts of both adults present. David chose his words with extreme care. "If your dad can get healthy, and that means not drinking anymore and learning to control his anger, and if your mum feels safe, then yes. But the most important thing always will be that you and your mum are protected and happy." "And what if he can't get better?" David looked at Sarah, who nodded almost imperceptibly, giving him permission to continue being honest. "Then we will keep taking care of both of you. There are many good people in the world, Emily. Your mum is one of those good people, and she will always find ways for you to be happy." Emily seemed satisfied with the answer. She stood up and walked over to Sarah, whispering something in her mother's ear that made Sarah blush again. "Issa," Sarah gently scolded, but David noticed that there was no real irritation in her voice. "What was that?" David asked with an amused smile. Sarah hesitated, then decided on honesty. "She said that you are much more handsome than the last officer who came here, and asked if you are single." David laughed, a genuine warm laugh that filled the small house with joy. A completely new energy filled the room. "Well, Emily, yes, I am single. Why do you want to know?" The girl looked at her mother, then back at David, with the brutal honesty that only children possess. "Because my mom gets really sad at night. I sometimes hear her crying, and you made her smile today." The silence that followed was heavy with complex emotions. Sarah was mortified by the exposure of her vulnerability, but also touched by her daughter's protective concern. David felt simultaneously honored by the child's trust and deeply moved by the strength of that little family. "Your mom is a very brave woman, Emily," David finally said, "and you are a very smart and caring girl. You both take great care of each other." In that moment, Sarah made a decision that surprised her. "Officer Anderson, would you like to have lunch with us? It's nothing special, just rice, beans, and fried egg, but—" She gestured vaguely. "It would be nice to have company." David glanced at his watch. 12:15 p.m. Technically, he was on duty, but a follow-up visit could justify an extension. And there was something about that house, that woman, and that extraordinary child that made him want to stay. "It would be an honor," he replied, and Emily clapped her hands excitedly. As Sarah headed to the small kitchen to prepare lunch, David helped Emily take off her school uniform and put on more comfortable clothes. Unbeknownst to them, the three were beginning to weave the first threads of a connection that would transform all their lives in ways none of them could foresee at that moment. Sarah's kitchen was a miracle of organization in minimal space. Makeshift shelves held jars of homemade spices, and a small window allowed the warm midday breeze to enter. The smell of sautéed garlic began to fill the air as she turned on the two-burner stove, her precise movements revealing years of practice in making a lot with little. David discreetly observed as she cooked, noticing how her delicate hands handled the utensils with efficiency. There was a natural grace in her gestures, even in the simplest tasks. Emily had sat down at the small kitchen table, doing homework and occasionally asking the officer questions about his job. "Uncle David, have you ever caught a real bad guy?" the girl asked, spontaneously using the affectionate term that made his heart skip a beat. "Yes, Emily, but do you know what I think is more important about my job?" he replied, pulling up a chair to sit next to her. "What?" "Helping good people like you and your mom. Catching bad guys is important, but protecting families is the part that makes me happiest." Sarah smiled to herself as she cracked the eggs into the frying pan. There was something deeply comforting about having a gentle male voice in her home, talking affectionately with her daughter. Mark had never shown that kind of patience with Emily, even before alcohol took over his life. "Mom works at the hospital," Emily continued proudly. "She takes care of sick people at night." "What an important job," David commented, looking at Sarah with genuine admiration. "Nurses are true heroes." Sarah turned, holding the spatula, her hair sticking to her forehead from the heat of the stove. "It's nothing heroic. It's just my job. Someone has to pay the bills." "Don't underestimate what you do," David said seriously. "Taking care of people when they are most vulnerable, working nights to ensure your daughter has everything she needs, that is heroic." The genuine compliment made Sarah blush again. She wasn't used to receiving recognition for her efforts. Mark had always belittled her work, saying that anyone could be a nurse. "Lunch is almost ready," she murmured, changing the subject to hide her embarrassment. When they sat down to eat, the small table forced an intimate closeness among the three. David sincerely praised the simple food, and Sarah realized there was no condescension in his words. He truly appreciated the homemade seasoning and the care with which she had prepared the meal. "Uncle David," Emily suddenly said, putting down her fork, "can you teach my mom how to defend herself?" "Emily," Sarah scolded, but David gently raised his hand. "Why do you think your mom needs to learn to defend herself, Emily?" The girl looked at her mother, then back at David, with that precocious seriousness that children exposed to conflict develop. "Because sometimes I'm afraid my dad will hurt her when I'm not here." Sarah's fork stopped midway to her mouth. She didn't know her daughter carried that worry. "Sweetheart, you don't need to worry about that," Sarah said softly, reaching out to touch her daughter's little face. "But I do worry," Emily insisted, her big eyes filling with tears. "What if he comes here when you're alone and I'm at school? What if he gets really angry?" David felt a tightness in his chest, seeing the child's genuine anxiety. He had encountered many families in similar situations, but he rarely saw such a small child express her fears so clearly. "You know, Emily, your concern is very understandable," he said calmly, "and actually, it would be a good idea for your mom to learn some basic self-defense techniques, not because we expect something to happen, but because knowing how to defend oneself can make a person feel more confident and secure." Sarah looked at him in surprise. "Do you really think it's necessary?" "I think it's wise," David replied honestly, "and I can teach some basic techniques if you'd like. Nothing complicated, just a few moves that can buy enough time to call for help or get out of a dangerous situation." "Teach her now," Emily eagerly requested, her previous sadness replaced by enthusiasm. David laughed. "Well, maybe after lunch we can do a basic demonstration in the backyard." After they finished eating, the three headed to the small backyard. The shade of the old mango tree offered a respite from the heat, and David began to teach Sarah. He demonstrated some basic self-defense moves. "The first thing is always to try to avoid confrontation," he explained, positioning himself in front of her. "But if it's not possible, you need to be quick and effective." He showed her how to break free from a wrist grab, how to use her knee to strike vulnerable points, and how to run efficiently. Sarah felt awkward at first, but Officer David was a patient instructor, correcting her posture with gentle and respectful touches. "See, like this," he said, guiding her arm movement. "The important thing is not to hesitate. If you need to use it, you have to do it with all the strength you can muster." Sarah felt the strength and assurance in his hands, guiding her movements, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to be protected by someone like him. The physical closeness during the lesson made her heart race in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Emily watched in fascination, occasionally shouting encouragements like, "That's it, Mom," or "Get him." Her joy at seeing her mother learn to defend herself was touching and revealing of how much the girl cared about their family's safety. When David finally prepared to leave, it was almost 3 in the afternoon. He had stayed much longer than any protocol would justify, but he didn't regret a single minute. "Thank you for today," Sarah said at the door, Emily hugging her waist. "For everything, the conversation, the lunch, the lesson." "Thank you," David replied sincerely. "It's been a long time since I've had such a pleasant afternoon." "Uncle David," Emily called as he was already at the gate. "Are you coming back?" David looked at Sarah, searching for any sign that he would be welcome. What he found in her eyes was a mix of hope and apprehension that mirrored exactly what he felt. "If your mom allows it, I would love to come back." "Of course," Sarah replied softly. It would be nice." As David walked away down the street, Emily waved energetically until he disappeared from sight. Sarah remained on the doorstep, watching his figure fade away, and for the first time in 2 years, she allowed herself to feel something akin to hope about the future. 2 weeks passed since that memorable lunch, and Sarah found herself in a situation she hadn't experienced in years, anxiously waiting for someone's arrival. David had developed the habit of stopping by her house during his rounds, always with an official excuse, checking for any recurrence of Mark, updating information from the incident report, or simply chatting with the residents of the area as part of a community policing program. On that rainy Thursday in March, Sarah was tidying up the house when Emily came home from school earlier than usual, soaked and visibly upset. "Mom, something bad happened at school," the girl said, dropping her wet backpack on the living room floor. Sarah immediately stopped folding clothes and knelt to her daughter's level. "What happened, sweetheart? Did you get hurt?" "No, I didn't, but Felipe from my class, his mum came to pick him up in the middle of class, crying a lot. The teacher said that his dad hit her again and that they had to go to Grandma's house." Sarah's heart tightened. She knew Felipe's family. They lived 3 blocks down, and Sarah had noticed a few times the discreet bruises on the woman's arms when they met at the corner store. "Aunt Vera said that when this happens, we can call the police," Emily continued, taking off her wet shoes. "I thought of Uncle David. Can he help Felipe?" Before Sarah could respond, firm knocks on the door interrupted the conversation. It was David, punctual as always, but this time with his uniform slightly damp from the rain and a more serious expression than usual. "Good afternoon," he greeted as Sarah opened the door. "May I come in? I need to talk to you about something important." Sarah immediately noticed the change in his tone. "Of course, come in. Is something wrong?" "Uncle David," Emily ran to hug him, as had become her custom. "I'm so glad you came. I need to talk to you about Felipe." David hugged the girl affectionately, but Sarah noticed that he seemed worried. "First, tell me about Felipe, Isa. Then I'll tell you what I came to talk about." Emily recounted the school episode with the precocious eloquence that always impressed adults. David listened attentively, asking specific questions about the child's family. "You did well to tell me, Emily," he said seriously. "I'll stop by the school tomorrow to talk to the principal and see how we can help Felipe's family." "And now tell me what brought you here today," Sarah asked, serving coffee for the 3 of them at the small kitchen table, trying to ignore how David's wet uniform clung to his body in a way that distracted her. David took a deep breath before speaking. "Mark was arrested last night." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily stopped stirring the sugar in her glass of milk, and Sarah felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "Why?" Sarah asked in a whisper. "He was driving drunk and caused an accident on San Miguel Avenue. He crashed into the back of a family car that was stopped at a traffic light. A 5-year-old child was hospitalized." Sarah covered her mouth with her hand, feeling nauseous. "Child? How is she?" "She'll be fine, thank God. Mild trauma, some cuts from the glass, but nothing serious. But Mark will face charges for bodily injury, driving under the influence. And there are some aggravating factors due to his past." Emily, who had grown accustomed to adult conversations about her father's problems, asked directly, "Does that mean he's going to jail?" David looked at Sarah, seeking guidance on how to respond. She nodded almost imperceptibly. "Probably yes, Emily. When adults make choices that hurt others, especially children, they need to face the consequences." "For how long?" Sarah asked, her voice controlled but tense. "It's hard to say right now. It can range from a few months to a few years, depending on how the process goes. But Sarah—" He hesitated. "There's one more thing." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "Go on." "The family of the injured child is considering a civil lawsuit against him to cover medical costs and damages," And there's the issue of the car he destroyed too. But he has nothing, Sarah exclaimed, her financial worries surfacing immediately. How are they going to collect from him? That's why I came to talk to you. Legally, you've been divorced from him for 2 years, so you can't be held responsible for his debts. But it's important for you to seek a lawyer to make sure you're protected. Sarah ran her hands through her hair, feeling the weight of yet another complication in her already difficult life. Lawyers cost money I don't have. I know some who do pro bono work for cases like yours. I can give you their contacts. Mom, Emily said softly, does this mean my dad won't come here and bother us anymore? The innocent question from the girl revealed something that broke the hearts of the two adults. An 8-year-old child feeling relieved by her father's imprisonment because it meant safety for her and her mother. For a good while, no, David replied gently. You'll be able to live in peace. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes, a confusing mix of relief, sadness, and guilt. Part of her had always hoped Mark would recover, that he would become the man she fell in love with years ago again. This imprisonment seemed to seal the end of that hope. Sarah, David said softly, reaching out to touch her hand on the table. I know it's complicated. Even when a relationship is problematic, it's never easy to see someone we once loved in this situation. His touch was warm and comforting, and Sarah realized she didn't pull her hand away. I just always thought he would get better, that he would be a good dad to Emily again. And maybe he still can, David said hopefully. Sometimes people need to hit rock bottom to seek real help. Jail might be the wake-up call he needed. Emily, once again demonstrating her precocious maturity, got up from the table and hugged her mother from behind. Mom, don't be sad. Uncle David said the child will be okay. And now you won't cry at night because you won't be scared. Sarah turned to hug her daughter, once again surprised by the girl's perception of her feelings. David watched the scene with a tightness in his chest, admiring the strength of that small family and wishing he could offer more than just professional support. The rain continued to patter against the window, creating an intimate atmosphere in the small kitchen. David knew he should leave. His presence there had already crossed professional boundaries, but something about Sarah's vulnerability at that moment made him want to stay and protect them from all storms, literal and metaphorical. David, Sarah said softly, using his first name for the first time. Thank you for coming to tell me in person. You didn't have to. I did, he replied, his green eyes meeting hers. You are important to me. The confession hung in the air between them, laden with meaning and possibilities that neither was fully prepared to face yet. The month of April brought a subtle yet significant change to the routine of Sarah and Emily. With Mark definitively out of their lives, an atmosphere of tranquility began to settle in the small house. David's visits, which had previously had the official excuse of following up on the incident, now occurred more naturally and frequently, creating a new family dynamic that none of the three wanted to name just yet. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, Sarah was hanging clothes on the line in the backyard when she heard Emily chatting excitedly with someone at the gate. Her heart leaped as she recognized David's deep voice responding to the girl's endless questions about police cars. "Mum, Uncle David brought a surprise!" Emily shouted, running toward the house with her eyes sparkling with excitement. Sarah dried her hands on her apron and walked to the gate, where she found David dressed in civilian clothes, a light blue polo shirt that accentuated his green eyes and jeans that made him look younger and more relaxed. It was the first time she had seen him out of uniform, and the visual impact caught her off guard. "Hi," he said with a shy smile that contrasted with the confidence he displayed in uniform. "I hope you don't mind the weekend visit." "Of course not," Sarah replied, trying to ignore how her heart raced seeing him like this, closer to an ordinary man than an official officer. "Emily mentioned a surprise?" Actually, there are two, David said, pointing to his parked sedan on the street, a well-maintained black sedan. First, I got the contacts for the lawyers I told you about. And second, he hesitated, as if unsure how the next part would be received. I thought maybe you'd like to go out a bit, see somewhere different. Emily jumped with excitement. Mom, can I? Please. It's been so long since... We haven't left the house. Sarah realized her daughter was right. Since the divorce, her outings had been limited to work, the grocery store, and Emily's school. The idea of a day out was tempting, but it also stirred her usual fears about trusting men and the implications of accepting invitations. "Where were you thinking?" she asked cautiously. "Central Park," David replied. "There's a nice playground for Emily, walking paths, and I thought we could have a picnic. I brought some things in the trunk of the car." His thoughtfulness in including activities for Emily and even preparing food in advance touched Sarah deeply. Mark had never planned anything for the family. When they went out, it was always on a whim and usually ended with him drinking too much at some bar. "Please, Mom," Emily pleaded, making that irresistible face that Sarah could never deny. "All right," Sarah gave in and was rewarded with an enthusiastic hug from her daughter and a radiant smile from David. "Let me just change and grab a few things." 30 minutes later, they were in the car heading to the park. Emily had settled into the back seat, excitedly commenting on the songs David was playing on the radio, while Sarah tried not to notice the masculine competence with which he drove or the subtle scent that emanated from him in the confined space of the vehicle. "Sarah," David said at a red light, "I want you to know that you don't need to worry about me. I understand. You have reasons to be cautious, and we'll go at your pace." The statement, made softly so Emily wouldn't hear, revealed a sensitivity that surprised Sarah. She glanced at him sideways, noticing how his hands held the steering wheel firmly but without tension. "Thank you," she murmured. That means a lot to me." Central Park was bustling with families enjoying the sunny Saturday. David found a shaded spot near the playground, and as they spread out the blanket for the picnic, Sarah watched how he naturally interacted with other children who approached curiously, always respectful yet warm. "Uncle David, do you know how to play soccer?" a boy of about 10 asked, noticing the ball David had brought. "I know a little," David replied modestly. "Want to try some kicks?" Before long, he had organized a small game with Emily and several other kids, while Sarah chatted with some mothers who had come over. It was comforting to see her daughter running and laughing without the shadow of worry she usually carried, and Sarah allowed herself to relax in a way she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Your husband is great with kids," one of the women commented, watching David teach Emily how to kick the ball more accurately. "Oh, he's not my husband," Sarah quickly corrected, feeling her face heat up. "He's a friend. A special friend, it seems," the woman smiled. "The way he looks at you and your daughter, it's lovely to see." Sarah turned her attention back to David, who at that moment was holding Emily in his arms so she could reach a branch of the tree where the ball had gotten stuck. There was something so natural in the way he treated her, as if she were truly his daughter. When they finally sat down to eat, David revealed that he had prepared sandwiches, brought cut-up fruit, and even a simple chocolate cake he had made himself. "You cook?" Sarah asked, impressed. "I've lived alone for 15 years, David laughed. "I learned out of necessity. My mom always said that a man who doesn't know how to cook doesn't know how to take care of himself." "Does your mom live here in New York?" David's face darkened slightly. "Yes, she does. She's been in General Hospital for a few weeks, complications from diabetes." Sarah felt a pang in her heart. "David, why didn't you tell me earlier? I work there. I could have—" "I didn't want you to feel obligated," he gently interrupted. "But It would be great if you could meet her when she's better." The prospect of meeting his mother created a new intimacy between them. Sarah realized that David was genuinely interested in including them in his personal life, not just maintaining a superficial relationship. "What's her name?" Emily asked, always attentive to adult conversations. "Mrs. Helen," David replied. "She would love to meet you both. She always complains that I want to stay single forever." "And do you want to?" Sarah asked impulsively, then regretted her boldness. David looked directly into her eyes. "Until a few weeks ago, I thought so. Now I'm not so sure." The moment, heavy with meaning, was interrupted by Emily, who had finished eating and wanted to go back to playing. But David's words echoed in Sarah's mind for the rest of the afternoon, awakening hopes she had buried long ago. When they returned home in the late afternoon, all tired but happy, Sarah realized that something fundamental had changed. For the first time since the divorce, she could imagine a future that included a romantic relationship, someone who genuinely cared for her and Emily. "Thank you for the day," she said when David walked them to the door. "Thank you," he replied. "It's been a long time since I felt so complete." After he left, Emily snuggled up on the sofa next to her mother, still excited about the day's adventures. "Mom, do you like Uncle David as more than a friend?" the girl asked with that brutal childlike honesty. Sarah pondered the question for a moment before answering honestly, "I think so, sweetheart. Does that bother you?" "No!" Emily exclaimed. "I like him a lot. He makes you smile for real, and he doesn't yell or get angry, and he likes me too." That night, for the first time in years, Sarah slept without the weight of loneliness on her chest, dreaming of possibilities that were starting to feel real and tangible. May arrived with a twist that no one expected. Sarah was finishing her night shift at General Hospital when her supervisor, nursing, approached her in the hallway of the endocrinology unit. "Sarah, there's a new patient in bed 23 who is asking specifically for you," said the supervisor, checking her clipboard. "Mrs. Helen Anderson. She said her son knows you." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Helen Anderson, David's mother. She quickly walked down the hallway, mentally organizing how she would introduce herself to the woman who had raised the man, stirring all her feelings. Mrs. Helen was awake in the hospital bed, a woman in her 60s with neatly styled grey hair and green eyes identical to her son's. Even weakened by her hospitalization, she maintained a dignified posture and a keen gaze that assessed Sarah from head to toe as she approached. "Are you Sarah?" Mrs. Helen asked in a hoarse but firm voice. "Yes, that's me. How are you feeling? Do you need anything?" "I need to talk to the woman who is turning my son's head," Mrs. Helen replied directly, with a half-smile that softened the apparent harshness of her words. Sarah felt her face flush. "Did David talk about me?" "He talked so much that I already know by heart your daughter's name, where you live, what color your eyes are, and that you make the best coffee he has ever had in his life," Mrs. Helen laughed, gesturing for Sarah to sit in the chair next to the bed. "In 40 years, I've never seen my son talk about a woman like this." "And what do you think about that?" Sarah asked, curious and a bit apprehensive about the answer. Mrs. Helen studied her for a long moment. "I think any woman who can make my son smile the way he has been smiling lately deserves a chance. But I also think you should know a few things about him." Sarah leaned forward, interested. "Like what?" "David has always been too serious for his age. His father died when he was 12, and he thought he needed to become a man overnight," Mrs. Helen began, adjusting herself in bed. "He worked from a young age, studied at night, joined the police because he wanted to protect people, but he never allowed himself to be truly happy." "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked softly. "Because I saw in his eyes something I had never seen before when he talked about you. Hope." true hope of having a family." Mrs. Helen paused. "But also because I want to warn you that he will try to be too perfect. He will be afraid of disappointing you." The conversation was interrupted by familiar footsteps in the hallway. David appeared at the door, carrying flowers and fruit, stopping abruptly when he saw Sarah sitting next to his mother. "Hi," he said, clearly surprised but smiling. "I didn't know you two had met." "Your mother sought me out," Sarah explained, standing up. "I didn't even know she'd been transferred to my unit." "Interesting coincidence," Mrs. Helen commented with a mischievous look that made David suspicious. "Mom, what have you been saying to Sarah?" he asked, moving closer to kiss his mother's forehead. "Just good things. About you, son. For the most part," she laughed. "Sarah, can you stay a little longer? I would like to know more about this granddaughter my son praises so much." Sarah looked at David, seeking approval. He nodded positively, and she sat back down, starting to tell Mrs. Helen about Emily. David watched the two women talking and felt a strange and wonderful emotion, as if the pieces of his life were finally falling into place. A week later, when Mrs. Helen was discharged, David organized a Sunday lunch at Sarah's house for the two to meet again. Emily had spent the entire morning nervously arranging and rearranging her drawings to show to Grandma Helen, as she had already started calling her. "Is she going to like me?" Emily asked for the 10th time, while Sarah finished seasoning the chili she'd been cooking since early morning. "She already likes you, sweetheart. We talked a lot about you in the hospital," Sarah reassured her daughter, but she herself felt a different anxiety. Meeting David's mother officially seemed like a significant step in the relationship she was developing with him. When David and Mrs. Helen arrived, the house was fragrant, with the aroma of cloves and cinnamon from the dessert Sarah had prepared. Mrs. Helen brought a gift for Emily, an old fairy tale book that had belonged to David himself when he was a child. "For a special girl, from a borrowed grandma," she said, hugging Emily affectionately. During lunch, Sarah observed the dynamic between mother and son. There was a lot of love there, but also an intense mutual concern. Mrs. Helen clearly felt guilty for having burdened David with responsibilities too early, and he blamed himself for any difficulties she faced. "David told me you're studying." "And for a test," Mrs. Helen said to Sarah while they were having coffee in the backyard, under the shade of the mango tree. "I'm trying. It's hard to balance work and taking care of Emily, but I want a more stable job," Sarah explained. "If you need help with the girl while you study, you can count on me," Mrs. Helen offered. "I've raised a son alone. I know how hard it is." The generosity of the offer touched Sarah deeply. "You raised David alone." "Since he was 12, and I can say it was the best job of my life." Mrs. Helen smiled, looking at her son, who was teaching Emily how to make soap bubbles. "But I think he needs a family of his own now. He deserves that." That night, after David took his mother back home, he returned to help Sarah wash the dishes. It was a simple domestic gesture, but it created a new intimacy between them. "Your mother is wonderful," Sarah said, drying a plate. "Emily has completely adopted her." "Did she say anything embarrassing about me?" David asked, trying to sound casual. Sarah was carefree but clearly curious. She laughed. "They said you were never really a child, that you always wanted to protect everyone." "It's true," David admitted, stopping washing the dishes to look at her. "But for the first time in my life, I also want to be protected. I want someone who cares if I got home safely, who waits for me to have dinner, who—" "Who what?" Sarah asked softly, moving closer to him. "Who truly loves me," he confessed, his voice low and vulnerable. "Sarah, I'm falling in love with both of you. And I know it's complicated. I know you have reasons to be scared, but—" Sarah silenced him by placing a finger over his lips. "David, I'm scared too, but I'm also falling in love." Their first kiss happened right there, in Sarah's small kitchen, with the sound of water dripping from the barely closed faucet and the soft afternoon light streaming through the window. It was a gentle kiss, filled with promises and hopes, but also with respect and patience. When they pulled apart, Emily appeared at the kitchen door with a mischievous smile. "Finally!" she exclaimed, making both adults laugh. "Can I call him stepdad now?" "Easy, Emily," Sarah laughed, blushing. "Let's take it slow." But as David embraced the two most important women in his life, he knew there was no rush. For the first time, he was absolutely certain of where he wanted to be and with whom he wanted to build his future. June brought the first serious complications for the romance blossoming between Sarah and David. The characteristic cold of Los Angeles winter settled in the city, but the storm approaching their lives would be much colder than any weather. It was a Tuesday morning when Sarah received an unexpected call at the hospital. On the other end of the line, a formal female voice identified herself as the lawyer for Mark's family. "Mrs. Johnson, I need to inform you that my client, Mrs. Constance, the grandmother of little Emily, is filing for shared custody of the child." Sarah felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Mrs. Constance was Mark's mother, a bitter and controlling woman who had always blamed Sarah for the failure of her son's marriage. "But that's impossible," Sarah stammered, trying to keep her composure in the busy hospital corridor. "Mark is in jail. There can't be shared custody." "Actually, ma'am, the request is for custody to be transferred to the paternal grandmother, considering that the father is temporarily incapacitated and that the mother is placing the child in an unsuitable environment." "Unsuitable environment? What unsuitable environment?" Sarah asked, her voice rising involuntarily. "We have information that you are inappropriately involved with a police officer and that this may be compromising the well-being of the minor." The phone nearly slipped from Sarah's trembling hands. "This is ridiculous. I have every right to have relationships." "The hearing is scheduled for next week. You will receive the summons at home. Have a good day." Sarah hung up the phone, in shock. Throughout her shift, she worked on autopilot, her mind spinning around the implications of that call. How did Mrs. Constance know about David? Who was providing information about her private life? When she got home, she found Emily doing homework at the dining table, focused on math problems. The girl looked up with a smile upon seeing her mother, completely unaware of the storm approaching. "Mom, Uncle David said he would try to come for dinner with us today. Can I make pasta?" Emily asked excitedly. Sarah forced a smile, not wanting to alarm her daughter before talking to David about the situation. "Of course, sweetheart, but first I need to make some phone calls." She called David, who answered on the first ring. "Hey, beautiful, how was your shift?" His affectionate voice almost made her cry. "David, I need to talk to you urgently. Can you come over earlier today?" "Sure. Did something happen? Your voice sounds strange. It's better if we talk in person." An hour later, David arrived home with a worried expression. Sarah had asked Emily to play in the backyard so they could talk privately. "What's wrong, Sarah? You're scaring me." Sarah told him about the lawyer's call, watching David's face darken progressively. When she finished, he was visibly upset. "This is absurd!" David exploded, getting up from the couch and starting to pace the small living room. "Our friendship doesn't harm Emily in any way." "But it could harm you," Sarah said quietly. "David, if this turns into a scandal, if they start investigating your personal life—" "Sarah, you're not suggesting we should end this because of that, are you?" Her silence was answer enough. David stopped pacing and knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "No, we won't let bitter people destroy what we're building." "What if I lose Emily?" Sarah whispered, tears finally spilling over. "What if the judge believes I'm an unfit mother?" That won't happen. You're a wonderful mother. Anyone with 2 brain cells can see that." At that moment, Emily burst into the living room, stopping abruptly upon seeing her mother crying and David kneeling beside her. "Mom, what happened? Did Uncle David make you cry?" the girl asked, immediately protective. "No, sweetheart." Sarah quickly wiped her eyes. "Uncle David didn't do anything. It's just adult issues." Emily approached and hugged her mother. "Is it about my dad? Did he get out of jail?" Sarah and David exchanged a glance. The girl's insight always surprised them. "Not exactly, Emily," David replied carefully, "but your Grandma Constance wants you to live with her for a while." Emily's face contorted in pure horror. "Grandma Constance? But she doesn't like me. She always says I'm just like my mom, and that's not a compliment." "Sweetheart, no one is going to force you to live anywhere," Sarah said firmly, hugging her. Emily, the stronger daughter, said, "Let's fight this." "But what if I have to go?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "What if they take me away? I don't want to be away from you, Mom, and not from Uncle David either." David felt his chest tighten, seeing the fear in the child's eyes. "Emily, look at me," he said gently. "I promise I will do everything I can to keep you two together. Can you trust me?" The girl nodded vigorously. "I trust you, but why doesn't Grandma Constance like you dating my mom?" The simple question brought to light the complexity of the situation. David and Sarah realized they would have to explain to an 8-year-old concepts of prejudice, family manipulation, and power struggles. "Some people think they know what's best for others, even when they don't," David explained. "Your grandma thinks she can take better care of you than your mom." "But that's not true," Emily protested. "My mom is the best mom in the world." "I know that, you know that, and any sensible judge will know that too," David asserted. That night, after putting Emily to bed, which took longer than usual due to the girls' worries, Sarah and David sat on the back porch, watching the few stars visible in the polluted sky of Los Angeles. "David, I can't risk losing Emily," Sarah finally said. "If necessary, I—" "Don't finish that sentence," David interrupted. "Sarah, I love you. I love both of you, and I won't let my presence in your lives be used against you in court." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm going to talk to my superiors tomorrow. I'm going to ask to be temporarily transferred to another area until this is resolved." "David, no! That's not fair!" "Fair would be you not having to go through this," he replied, pulling her close. "But if my temporary absence will help ensure that Emily stays with you, then that's what I'll do." Sarah cried on his shoulder, feeling torn between the love she had for him and the panic of losing her daughter. David held her tightly, mentally planning to talk to lawyers, co-workers, anyone who could help prove that Sarah was an exemplary mother. Their fight for happiness was just beginning, but for the first time in their lives, neither of them was facing the adversities alone. July arrived with an almost palpable tension. David had secured a temporary transfer to a precinct in East Los Angeles, physically distancing himself from Sarah and Emily, but keeping in touch through nighttime phone calls and discreet messages. The strategy was clear: remove any ammunition that Mrs. Constance could use against Sarah in court. The hearing was set for a cold Friday in the middle of the month. Sarah had managed to get a lawyer through the contacts David provided. Dr. Charles Mendez, a 50-year-old man specializing in family law with a solid reputation for defending mothers in similar situations. "Their case is weak," Dr. Charles had explained during the preparation. "Rodrigo is in jail, you have stable employment, a home, and the child is doing well in school. The relationship with the police officer, if presented correctly, even strengthens your case. It shows emotional stability and a positive father figure for Emily." But Sarah knew that courts could be unpredictable, especially when there was money and influence on the opposing side. Mrs. Constance had hired one of the most expensive law firms in the area, and rumors circulated that she was using the assets she had sold from her son's house to fund the legal battle. On the morning of the hearing, Sarah woke up with a knot in her stomach. She had slept poorly, tormented by nightmares where men in suits took Emily away while she screamed desperately. The girl, in turn, showed a frightening maturity for her 8 years, helping her mother choose her outfit and offering words of encouragement that should come from an adult. "Mom, you're going to tell the truth to the judge, right?" Emily asked as they had breakfast at a quiet table. "Of course, sweetheart. Always the truth." "Then everything will be fine. The truth is that you're the best mom in the world, and I want to stay with you." Sarah hugged her daughter, trying to memorize that moment. The smell of her hair, the small weight of her body in her arms, the absolute trust in her child's voice. If she lost the hearing, she didn't know when she would have another chance to hug her daughter like that. At the courthouse, Sarah found Dr. Charles and, to her surprise, David waiting in the hallway. He was in uniform with impeccable military posture, but his green eyes revealed the same anxiety she felt. "David, what are you doing here?" Sarah asked, approaching him. "I came to testify on your behalf," he replied simply. "Dr. Charles called me as a character witness. My captain approved. But what if this harms Sarah? I'm not going to hide. Our friendship, our relationship, everything has been honest and beneficial for Emily. If the court can't see that, the problem is with the system, not us." Mrs. Constance arrived minutes later, a 60-year-old woman with artificially blonde hair and expensive clothes that contrasted with her bitter expression. She barely looked at Sarah, but shot David a look of pure hatred when she recognized him. The hearing was tense from the start. Mrs. Constance's lawyer, Dr. Robert Smith, an elegant and articulate man, built an argument based on Sarah's emotional instability and inappropriate exposure of the minor to early relationships. "Your Honor," argued Dr. Smith, "the petitioner offers a stable environment, a spacious home in the East Side, adequate financial resources, and most importantly, traditional values that will ensure the appropriate moral development of the minor." When it was Dr. Charles's turn, he presented a completely different picture. Medical documents proving Emily's regular checkups, excellent school reports, letters of recommendation from teachers and neighbors, and even a report from social services that had visited Sarah's home the previous month. "Your Honor," Dr. Carlos argued, "we are faced with an exemplary mother who has raised a healthy, intelligent, and happy child on her own. The fact that she has found a stable relationship with an upstanding public safety professional only demonstrates her ability to build healthy bonds." When David was called to testify, Sarah felt her heart race. He approached the microphone with the confident posture of someone used to giving testimonies, but there was an emotion held back in his voice that revealed how much this meant to him. "Officer Anderson," the judge said, a middle-aged man with a serious but not hostile expression, "can you tell us about your relationship with the respondent and her daughter?" "Your Honor, I met Sarah and Emily in a professional context during a domestic violence incident. Since then, I have developed deep respect and admiration for both," David replied clearly. "Sarah is one of the most dedicated and courageous people I have ever met. She works tirelessly to provide her daughter with everything she needs, and Emily is an exceptionally well-behaved and happy child." "And what is the exact nature of your relationship with the respondent?" David looked directly at Sarah before responding. "We are getting to know each other better, Your Honor, with respect, patience, and always prioritizing Emily's well-being. At no point has my presence brought any instability to that family. On the contrary." Mrs. Constance's lawyer tried to question the appropriateness of a police officer getting involved with a family in a vulnerable situation, but David responded calmly and precisely, explaining how he had followed all protocols and how his relationship with Sarah had developed naturally, always with transparency. The most impactful moment came when Emily was called to speak with the judge in a private chamber. Sarah felt her legs weaken as her daughter, dressed in the best dress she owned, bravely walked toward the magistrate's office. 15 minutes later, Emily emerged from the room with red eyes, but her chin held high in determination. She walked directly to Sarah and whispered, "I told the truth, Mom. I said you are the best mom in the world and that I don't want to live with Grandma Constance." When the judge returned to the courtroom, his face was inscrutable. Sarah held Emily's hand and closed her eyes, preparing for any decision. After careful consideration of all the elements presented, the judge began, his voice echoing in the silent room. "This court concludes that..." The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity, carrying the future of three people who had discovered the meaning of true love amid life's adversities. "This court concludes that there are no grounds to justify changing the custody of minor Emily Johnson," the judge declared, his firm voice echoing through the room. "The respondent, Sarah Johnson, has demonstrated to be an exemplary mother, providing the child with a stable environment, adequate education, and most importantly, unconditional love. The request from Mrs. Constance is denied." Sarah felt as if the entire world had stopped for a moment before it began to spin again with full force. Emily let out a cry of joy and threw herself into her arms, while tears of relief streamed down both their faces. Across the room, David closed his eyes and murmured a silent prayer of gratitude. Mrs. Constance left the room visibly upset, muttering threats about appeals and motions, but Dr. Carlos reassured Sarah that, given the arguments presented and Emily's own testimony, any appeal would have little chance of success. Outside the courthouse, under the grey, July sky, the small family gathered in a collective embrace that definitively sealed the bonds that had been forming over the months. "It's over," Sarah whispered, still not fully believing in the victory. "No, Sarah," David said, holding her face between his hands. "This is just the beginning." The following months were filled with rebuilding and growth. David returned from his temporary transfer and was officially assigned to a new unit specializing in domestic violence, where his personal experience became a valuable tool to help other families in similar situations. Inspired by her own journey, Sarah decided to take advantage of the scholarship she had received and enrolled in a law course, discovering a passion for advocating for women in vulnerable situations. Mrs. Helen, fully recovered from her health issues, became the grandmother that Emily had always deserved, filling the home with love and stories from David's childhood. In September, when the first flowers of spring began to bloom in the gardens of Los Angeles, David made a decision that had been maturing in his heart since that first lunch at Sarah's house. It was a sunny Sunday, and the three of them were in the backyard tending to a small garden that David had started planting with Emily. The girl, now 9 years old and even smarter, was explaining to the plants how they should grow, eliciting laughter from the adults. "Sarah," David said, putting down the shovel and wiping his hands on a cloth, "I need to talk to both of you." Emily stopped talking to the cherry tomatoes and paid attention, as did Sarah, who noticed the seriousness in his tone. "You know that I love you both very much, right?" he began, kneeling in the damp earth to be at Emily's eye level. "We know," the girl replied excitedly, "and we love you too." "So," David took a deep breath, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Sarah Johnson, will you marry me?" The silence that followed was broken by Emily's excited scream. "Mommy, say yes! Say yes!" Sarah looked at the simple but beautiful ring David held, then at her daughter's eager face, and finally into the green eyes of the man who had transformed their lives in a way she never thought possible. "Only if Emily agrees to be my maid of honor," Sarah replied, smiling through tears of happiness. "Yes!" Emily shouted, jumping, and hugging both of them at the same time. The wedding took place 3 months later in a simple ceremony at the courthouse, followed by a party on the rooftop of their house, just as Sarah had dreamed. Neighbors, colleagues from the hospital, David's co-workers, and of course Mrs. Helen, all gathered to celebrate a union that had emerged from adversity but had been strengthened by love, patience, and courage. Emily stole the show as the maid of honor, wearing a pink dress she had personally chosen and carrying the rings with the seriousness of someone who knew she was part of something very important. Mark, who had been released a few months earlier and was trying to recover from alcoholism, showed up at the party for a few minutes. It was a tense moment, but he limited himself to greeting his daughter and wishing happiness to Sarah and David, acknowledging that they had created the family he had never been able to give to Emily. As night fell and the last guests departed, the three of them sat on the rooftop, watching the city lights stretch to the horizon. Emily was sleeping in David's lap, exhausted from the day's emotions, while Sarah rested her head on her husband's shoulder. "We did it," Sarah murmured, still wearing the simple white dress she had bought for the ceremony. "Did what?" David asked, kissing the top of her head. "Be happy. Despite everything, against all odds, we managed to be genuinely happy." David smiled, watching his adopted daughter sleep peacefully and feeling the gentle weight of his wife beside him. "I think we always knew it would work out." "Always knew?" Sarah chuckled softly. "Are you sure? I remember being terrified most of the time." "Maybe we didn't always know," David admitted. "But we always hoped, and sometimes hope is enough to get started." Above them, fireworks from some distant celebration lit up the sky, as if the city itself was celebrating with them. Emily stirred in her sleep, murmured something about complete family, and smiled, still asleep. There, on that simple rooftop in East Los Angeles, a brave nurse, an upright police officer, and an extraordinary girl had found something that many search for their whole lives: a true home, built not on easy promises or fleeting passions, but on mutual respect, shared growth, and the daily decision to choose love, even when circumstances made it difficult. The story that had begun with an embarrassing confession over the phone transformed into a lesson about how true love is not just a feeling, but a courageous choice to build something beautiful and lasting, especially when the world seems to conspire against that happiness. And under the starry sky of East Los Angeles, as the city breathed around them, Sarah, David, and Emily discovered that sometimes happy endings don't come ready-made. They are built day by day with patience, courage, and the unwavering faith that true love can overcome any adversity.